This revelation that is clearly echoing through all of Trump world tonight. A diplomat at the heart of this scandal, a Trump donor turned ambassador. This is someone who's supposed to be on the president's side, making a startling statement. And let me say it very simply and starkly to you right now. This Trump-friendly witness says he believes there was a quid pro quo. I'm speaking about reporting that's based on the lawyer for the ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, who is telling the Wall Street Journal that quid pro quo admission is exactly what Sondland has already revealed to those impeachment investigators in the Congress, testifying he believed Ukraine had agreed to open investigations into a Biden-linked firm, and that was a, quote, condition for a White House meeting between Trump and Ukraine's president. Quote, asked whether that arrangement was a quid pro quo, which of course is the heart of this impeachment inquiry, Mr. Sondland said he believed the answer was yes. You don't need to be a lawyer or an impeachment expert to know that yes is not what the Trump White House wants to hear. Gordon Sondland is a key player. Of course, Republicans have cited the text he wrote in the middle of all this to a fellow diplomat as a potential or alleged defense of Donald Trump. Sondland had infamously wrote, quote, the president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quos of any kind. Right here, you are seeing in the texts that are leaking out, in the evidence that's leaking out, in the testimony we're getting from the Congress, where the tension is in this impeachment probe. Now, I want to give you context, as we always try to do. Mr. Sondland has distanced himself from that original text. He said basically, look, I wrote it, yeah, but those were Trump's words, and the argument there is he's a diplomat. Sometimes he just says what his bosses say. But we're not doing diplomacy right now. We're doing, the Congress is doing, and the country is watching an investigation. So it appears that Republicans would have trouble trying to dismiss Mr. Sondland as any kind of disgruntled partisan, let alone a member of the so-called deep state. He is a Trump donor and a Trump loyalist. He was handpicked by Donald Trump to be the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. He is also not a longtime Washington insider or someone who can be accused of having agency or State Department loyalty, nothing like that. He is a basically successful businessman up to this point with a lucrative hotel chain in the Pacific Northwest. And he's also, as mentioned, and this is how he got the job, according to many, a major Republican donor. After Donald Trump was nominated in 2016, he joined Trump's RNC finance operation and then popped over a cool $1 million to Donald Trump's inaugural committee. Why am I telling you all this history right now? Because in an investigation, witnesses matter. And when the witnesses saying bad things for the White House are the White House's best friends and donors, that's really bad. That is the man who is now, and this is the first time we've reported this tonight, a man who's now telling congressional investigators there was a, quote, quid pro quo. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's former chief of staff is saying that before he left the White House, he made a very specific warning to the president. Don't hire a yes man to become chief of staff, because that itself could risk the road to impeachment.
I said, whatever you do, don't hire a yes man, someone that's going to tell you, or it won't tell you the truth. Don't do that. Because if you do, I believe you'll be impeached. And someone has got to be the guy that tells you that, you either have the authority or you don't, or, Mr. President, don't do it because whatever, but don't hire someone that will just, nod and say, that's a great idea, Mr. President, because you will be impeached.
Because you will be impeached, a warning that echoes tonight. And I should tell you, it is quite the busy news night. I am here, as mentioned, live from Philadelphia. I want to tell you why I'm here briefly. Earlier today, I was co-moderating a town hall on criminal justice reform from inside one of the largest prison facilities in the U.S. I was joined by candidates Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Tom Steyer. That's why we're here. And we'll bring you more of that later in the show. But we begin with the big news and the big guests. And I'm thrilled to tell you who's right here next to me in Philadelphia, Jeffrey Rosen, president and CEO of the National Constitution Center. Quite fitting. I should also mention he has a book, Conversations with RBG, that's coming out next week. I'm also joined by Craig Green, a law professor here at Temple University in Philadelphia. And we have many other guests from around the nation as part of our special tonight. But we begin here from a straight-up investigative point of view. And the law often revolves around what you can prove, not just what you think. How do you view this evidence tonight from Mr. Sondland, who is a Trump buddy, to use a non-technical term, saying, forget what I texted, forget what I wrote, it's a quid pro quo?
The fact that he says that he told the president that it was a quid pro quo seems especially significant because it makes it harder for the president to claim that no one advised him of that. And it does clear up any ambiguity that may have been left by the text. So in that sense, as you say, it's quite significant.
Craig, do you agree?
I do. I think that right now for both of your leading stories, we're in the middle of the beginning. So I think that the impeachment vote and I think Sondland's testimony shows that this inquiry is very serious, the allegations are very serious, and the potential evidence being collected is very serious. We can't know exactly what the evidence says, but I think all of the steps forward are those. They're steps forward, and I think Sondland's testimony is just exactly that.
Jeffrey, as we think about the system that the founders created, I don't want to lean too hard into Philadelphia, but you do run the darn Constitution Center.
Which is right across the mall, right
over there. I can see it.
Isn't it beautiful? It's the most inspiring sight on the mall.
I don't want to overly plug what you do, but it's wonderful. I'm literally looking at a wall that says "We the People" over there. That Constitution was built not just for good times, but famously for challenging times. The impeachments that we've seen, whether you go back to Johnson or the procedure that was leading up to Nixon, were times where the country was very strained. It is not unique to 2019 that people sometimes have different ideas and different views of the facts. I wonder what you think of the way that the Democrats today are saying they're using this process. And I want to play for you Adam Schiff, who's now the front man of the investigation, which eventually could or will be turned over to the Judiciary Committee. Here's Schiff using these powers afforded to him under our Constitution.
I think we can infer from the White House opposition to Dr. Kupperman's testimony that they believe that his testimony would be incriminating of the president. But we move forward, and we will obviously consider, as we inform Dr. Kupperman's counsel, his failure to appear as evidence that may warrant a contempt proceeding against him.
The distinction there being this is not normal times where you play it out and you debate whether someone can come into the Congress. Congressman Schiff, with the clear backing of Speaker Pelosi today, saying we're going to keep tabs of who doesn't show, and it's going to be evidence towards a potential impeachment of Donald Trump.
That's right. And it's absolutely right. The founders created impeachment for bad times. They had George Washington before them, but realized that they might have someone else, which is why Washington himself made an exception to his executive privilege claims for impeachment, which he said the Congress should have access to. And here, it's not a criminal trial. So Congress is allowed to use Fifth Amendment pleas for adverse inferences. And more significantly today, it's a big deal that there's going to be a formal vote because this puts us in the same territory as the Nixon impeachment. Nixon began in secret. There was grand jury testimony, but then there was a formal vote, and they appointed counsel for both sides. And after that, Congress had much more legal authority to ask for what it wants. So although, in fact, this may not play out in court because the Democrats want to move this quickly and don't want to wait for court rulings, constitutionally, the fact that this is a formal impeachment investigation gives the Congress very broad power to seek the information it wants.
And Craig, are the Democrats then, in your view, on firmer ground? Because what they're telegraphing tonight, and we don't yet have the full resolution, is a process of how they're going to deal with evidence, how they're going to release depositions so that the public can see what they've gathered, and how if the report or whatever the Intelligence Committee finds is at a certain level, they refer to the Judiciary Committee, which is where impeachments usually go.
Yeah, I think it's very important. One thing to remind everyone of is that the Democrats in the House are really just the investigation. They're more like the grand jury, if you want to think of it that way, or preparing the indictment. There will be a trial with all kinds of procedures designed by Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans that awaits sort of behind door number 2. But this is both a constitutional crisis in one sense, where the Republican president is stonewalling and misleading and obstructing. It's also a credibility crisis, because I think a lot of Americans, 30 to 40% of Americans, don't actually seem to mind what the facts are. I think the president could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue is sort of the vernacular. And I think that that's actually in some ways the more serious crisis. So I think when we approach the vote and think about that more than think about the procedures, think about people going on record, Republicans in particular, going on record of whether they even support inquiring about the kind of allegations and the kind of evidence that I think all of America knows is there.
Yeah, and you're speaking of the evidence, which is the big question here, which is, does the accumulation of evidence, including this bombshell of Trump's own person saying it's a quid pro quo, change the calculus in the Senate? There's a lot of cynics who say nothing changes anything. Of course, the last couple of weeks have shown, wow, whistleblowers and facts can change a lot.
And could I jump in? I think that the impeachment proceedings are less about removing a president than they are about finding the truth. I think this stage of the process, if you don't support an impeachment inquiry on the evidence that's available, then I think you've chosen president over country.
Right. And you're speaking as someone who's following the rules and the evidence, not rooting for a particular side. I want both of you to hang with me here in Philadelphia. But because this is the beat, it's not just the Philadelphia beat. I want to go to someone that many of our viewers will recognize, NYU law professor Melissa Murray, who often guides us through these big impeachment news days lately. Good evening to you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm thrilled. I've got a lot of energy from being out here and thinking about a lot of different parts of criminal justice today. As mentioned, we'll get to some of that later in the hour. I want to play for you Vice President Pence on the same issue that got basically the White House all nervous today with this Sondland testimony, which comes back to the heart of it. Was there a quid pro quo bribe or not? Take a look.
Are they all lying?
Well, I can only tell you what I know.
But did you have knowledge of the deal that these U.S. officials have described under oath?
What I can tell you is all of my interaction on this issue focused entirely on three things.
Did you have knowledge of what they're describing or no?
We stood with them.
I haven't gotten a clear answer from you on that, though, sir. Are you saying you did not ever hear of such a deal?
All of my conversation with President Zelensky were entirely focused on issues of importance to the American people.
What's happening there, Professor?
A lot of bobbing and weaving for someone who's not in the ring. That's a lot of evasion for the vice president, someone who ostensibly would have some knowledge of what was going on with regard to the talks with Ukraine. He was the one who was withdrawn from President Zelensky's inauguration in favor of Rick Perry, of the Rick Perry made me do it defense. So obviously he has a little bit of knowledge about what's going on here, and he is avoiding answering those questions directly.
And when you see that avoidance, do you have a sense that there is a single impeachment defense strategy coming out of this White House or not? Because one of the things that's most striking, and we have a little bit more on this later in the hour as Republicans are voicing their concern with more panic and more leaks, is that you have Mulvaney trying to say, well, maybe there was a quid pro quo and it's cool, and then going, no, I didn't say that. You have Pence saying, basically, I don't care how evasive I look. Evasive looks better than admitting a quid pro quo. And then you have these other officials that we report at the top of the hour saying, yup, there was one.
So it seems like there are a couple of different threads here that are being woven together. So one is this idea that there is no quid pro quo at all. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. There was no quid pro quo. Then there's the idea that there's always a little bit of pressure and pressure brought to bear in diplomacy. And this is just one of those situations, and it's of no moment. And then there's the issue that there was a kind of quid pro quo, but maybe it wasn't necessarily about Biden, but about this question of corruption and fighting corruption more generally on the world stage. Either way, Vice President Pence's inability to answer the question directly and to evade in such an elaborate way really gives someone pause.
What does it mean to you as someone who's been following this so closely, and we've even had these debates on our show about how far to go? Some viewers may remember a great exchange you had with Counselor John Flannery, where you were saying that pre-Ukraine, you understood why Speaker Pelosi wasn't going farther. What does it say to you that Speaker Pelosi, by the evidence or by the process, is now scheduling this vote Thursday, something we have yet to see in the Trump era, which is a formal floor vote moving towards the potential impeachment of President Trump?
Well, I remember that exchange, and I remember I took a lot of heat from your viewers for being a, well, quote-unquote, Pelosi toady. But I think she kind of had the lay of the land here. I mean, she waited.
Well, Professor, I hope our viewers didn't use any such language. Our viewers love you, but go ahead.
Well, some of them did not love me after that. But I stick by that. I think she understood the lay of the land. I think she understood that she needed something that would really stick, not something that was nebulous, but something that was really firm. And what could be more firm and comprehensive than these allegations? These are really important and really big. And now that she's moving forward, I think, again, you have the Republicans on the rope. Like last week, the Republicans were talking about the procedural irregularities. No one wanted to talk about the substance, whether or not the president of the United States withheld foreign aid in order to get a foreign government to investigate a political rival. And what could be more damning than that? So I think she actually made the right call. I stand by my decision. I stand up to all of those who called me a Pelosi toady. I think I was vindicated.
Well, that's great. That's why the conversation, like the news, keeps going. So you get to update on that. My special thanks to Professor Murray for joining us. I also want to thank Craig Green, who was right here with me in Philadelphia. And for you Constitution fans, you should know that Mr. Rosen stays as we get into some really interesting precedents that the Democrats are looking at later this hour. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.